get started in here. This is the story of Lake Minnetonka's streetcar boats, but we're going to start in a time period a little bit before the streetcar boats came into existence because we have to build the context here. So if you go back to the 1800s of Lake Minnetonka, the late 1800s, this is after the frontier period, but before this area became more of a residential area, the Lake Minnetonka area was much more of a tourist area, starting in about 1870s and going to the 1890s. In 1879, there were a few hotels that went up around the lake that were quite large. The first was the Hotel St. Louis in Deep Haven, which was built in 1879. Also built in 1879 was the Lake Park Hotel in Tonka Bay. And then a couple years later, in 1882, the Hotel Lafayette was built in Minnetonka Beach, which was the largest of the big three, as we call them. Most of the people that came to these large resorts were wealthy tourists who would come to Minnesota to spend the entire summers on Lake Minnetonka. They came from places like St. Louis or maybe New Orleans or places out east like Boston or New York maybe. But they would come out here and they would bring their hired help and they would spend entire summers in Minnesota to escape the oppressive summer heat. And this was kind of on the edge of society, of civilization, so it was kind of an exotic destination at that time. But this period faded away in the 1890s due to a couple of reasons. There were some commerce laws that were changed, and also just the railroad expanded westward, which allowed people to go to other more exotic destinations to go on vacation. I also like to point out that during this time, the lake saw an influx of a lot of large steamboats on the lake. The two largest were the most famous ones probably, were the city of St. Louis, pictured here. This one was about 165 feet long and was the first steamboat, inland steamboat in the country to be equipped with electric lights, apparently. But the largest steamboat ever on the lake was the Belle of Minnetonka, pictured below there. The Belle of Minnetonka was about 300 feet long and could purportedly hold about 2,000 passengers, although I don't know if it ever actually did hold that many people. There were quite a few of these large steamboats. These were by far the largest, but there were quite a number of them that were in the range above 100 feet long. And so it was kind of a different period, and they transported people, mail, freight, all of that, primarily to hotels and various towns. People would come to the lake to Wayzata, where they would deboard their trains and board the steamboats that would bring them to points across the lake, all the way out here to Mound. They would come to Chapman's right on Cooks Bay. However, that period, the glory years as we call them, the resort period, that came to an end basically by about 1897, and that was the year that the Hotel Lafayette burned down. I mentioned there were just a number of factors that contributed to that decline, but one by one these hotels kind of closed down, and some of them burned down, but most of them just closed and were dismantled. But during the same period, the late 1890s and early 1900s, the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul were really expanding as an urban area. This was driven at first by the lumber industry, but then eventually it turned into the flour milling industry at St. Anthony Falls. That really was the powerhouse behind the economy, and the Twin Cities became a large metropolitan area of 600,000 plus residents. Now, with this surge of new people coming in, Lake Minnetonka became closer and closer to the city as the city basically expanded westward. And many of the people who lived in Minneapolis during this time, a lot of middle class, upper class people too, but a lot of the middle class people built cottages around the lake at this time, and wealthier people built their big summer estates out on the lake as well. Also during this time, the Twin Cities streetcar system was rapidly expanding because people needed transportation to get to where they needed to go. So the TCRT, which was the Twin City Rapid Transit Company, formed in the 1890s, and it expanded rapidly under Chairman Thomas Lowry. You've probably heard of Thomas Lowry before. He has many things named after him, including a tunnel and streets and other things. But him and Kelvin Goodrich, who was the general manager, really expanded the company. How they made money was not necessarily by charging fares. They made money by building tracks to the middle of nowhere and then having that land around those tracks be developed. And then they would sell that land, and it was increased in value. So it was basically a real estate company is how they made money, and then fares and operations were kind of the afterfact of that. The Twin Cities streetcar system expanded out into the suburbs in the early 1900s. By 1905, a track was expanded from Lake Harriet all the way out to Excelsior, and that opened in October 1905. You could also going east, go all the way to Stillwater, and that's about 40 or 45 miles in between, and you could get anywhere quickly and cheaply. So this was all happening during the time that we call the cottage period, or some people call it the glory years. But the cottage period, they're not glory years, golden years, excuse me. But during this time, I mentioned a lot of the wealthy people, a lot of the lumber and flour milling barons built their summer estates out on the lake. A lot of them, like Ferndale comes to mind, or even places like Deep Haven, Maple Woods, that area. But also a lot of middle-class families were able to build cottages out here and own land too. One example of that is the Thompson Cottage in Minnetonka Beach, which still stands today, and that's pictured below. But these people were primarily, the middle-class people were people who commuted to work every day, or they owned small businesses downtown, and their actual homes were probably downtown too, and these were just summer homes. But they still needed a way to commute to work every day in the summer when they were out here. And transportation around the lake remained somewhat difficult. There were trains coming out here, but nothing on a rapid, regular, fast basis. So after the streetcar line was expanded to Excelsior in 1905, they could get to downtown Minneapolis from Excelsior in about 45 minutes or so. But Lake Minnetonka is a very bizarrely shaped lake, as I'm sure you're aware. Lots of bays and islands and peninsulas and so on and so forth. So rather than building track all the way around its 125 miles of shoreline, they had the brilliant idea to build these streetcar boats, as they were called. Officially, they were known as express boats. But these were built by the Twin City Rapid Transit Company, 6 of them in total, and they would serve 26 or sometimes 27 ports of call around the lake, so anywhere from Wayzata, Excelsior, Deep Haven. Zumbra Heights was the greatest extent that they went. They did come up here to Mound for a couple years, but it was more practical just to serve Spring Park instead, which was one of the main stops. But these boats there's 6 of them in total, and they were all built identical to resemble the streetcars in every detail. So they were painted canary yellow and oxide red, and they had the same kind of the pocket windows that actually they can open by dropping into the hull. And the seats were exactly the same as those found on the streetcars, the caned seating. And they were also named after popular stops on the Twin Cities streetcar system. So we had the Minnehaha, which was named after the streetcar stop at Minnehaha Park, Minnehaha Falls. And we had the White Bear, the Como, the Hopkins, Harriet, and I think I might be forgetting one, but it'll come to me. But they're all popular places on the Twin Cities streetcar system, and names that are still common throughout the Twin Cities today. And I mentioned 26 designated landings around the lake. These were everywhere from just little cottage enclaves to bigger towns like Excelsior and Spring Park, etc. So here is a map of the western portion of the Twin Cities streetcar system. As you can see, the right side starts just in, this is Minneapolis here, so the other half goes all the way to St. Paul and Stillwater. But you can see the track here coming from Lake Harriet all the way down through Hopkins right here. And then in Hopkins, there was actually, it branched out into two different lines. One went to Excelsior, and then there was a branch line that went to Deep Haven. The line out here to Excelsior came right out here and went right to the waterfront. And then it went down Water Street a little bit, actually, in downtown Excelsior. They eventually built an extension to that line going all the way out to Tonka Bay and Wildhurst on the upper lake. So you could actually take a streetcar directly from Minneapolis all the way to the upper lake and then board a streetcar boat here and go all the way to Zumbra Heights, Crane Island, or even for a couple of years, Mound. So this is what it looked like, the scene at Excelsior in, this would have been 1906, and I know it's 1906 because they eventually built a big transfer terminal here, a beautiful structure that you may have seen postcards of before, and that wasn't built right away, but they finished it later on in 1906. But you can see the streetcar coming right up to the waterfront like that, and then one of the streetcar boats, the Como, coming right up to the dock, and it was kind of a seamless transfer like that. They didn't have to walk far at all. And it was the same case in Deep Haven and Wildhurst, basically, when those lines went into service the following year or the year after that. So the routing was not the same throughout the life of the streetcar boats. It did change a few times. Originally, the streetcar connections were all made in Excelsior, Deep Haven, and Tonka Bay. And I guess that was actually added in 1907 and 1908, the Tonka Bay and Deep Haven lines. But there were originally 4 different routes that all originated from Excelsior. And one of those routes was Excelsior to Wayzata. Another one was Excelsior to Minnetonka Beach. The third one was Excelsior to Spring Park, and the fourth one was Excelsior to Zumbra Heights out in Minnetrista. Between 1908 and 1912, routing was actually split into 2. So 2 of those lines originated in Excelsior, the one going to Wayzata and the one going to Minnetonka Beach. The other 2 were operated out of Wildhurst because a spur line was built to Wildhurst on the upper lake. And those 2 lines were the ones that went to Spring Park and Zumbra Heights and Crane Island. After 1913, the routing was all combined into one continuous loop, which transit people even today kind of gawk over, because it was one continuous loop that operated, it took about an hour to do the main portion of the loop, and they operated on the hour every hour, basically. And it was coordinated so that the streetcars would meet the boats at the waterfront as they were coming up to the dock at the same time. So the passengers didn't have to wait at all. It was just a beautifully executed, perfectly timed, choreographed system. And that lasted all the way to 1926 until the end of streetcar boat service on Lake Minnetonka. I mentioned Mound was serviced for a couple of years. As far as we know, we've looked at the schedules. Mound was only serviced regularly for a couple of years, 1908, 1909. So it was kind of sporadic. And they would stop at Chapman's. We have pictures of that. I'll show you a picture here. We think that Mound probably was dropped from the schedule because the train also went through Spring Park, and it was probably easier just to go to Spring Park instead of having the boats go all the way up to Cook's Bay and add a lot of time that way. But Crane Island, another interesting place that was added. It was not part of the original routing, but it was added by 1911 at the request and lobbying of island residents. Also, the other interesting thing is Zumbra Heights, which was always served between 1906 and 1926. You're probably wondering if you're familiar, Zumbra Heights doesn't have much in it. There's a couple houses there, but it is important to note that one of the people that had a big summer estate at Zumbra Heights was Calvin Goodrich, the general manager of Twin City Rapid Transit Company. So he had boat service to his private home, basically. So I'll just show you a few pictures here. This is one of the streetcar boats off of Casco Point. That boathouse still stands today. This is a famous postcard. You can see it, it's all over the place. But this is a image of the streetcar boat White Bear at Shady Island, or Shady Isle. Here's a picture of one of the streetcar boats at Chapman's on Cook's Bay. So you can see they went right up there. That's also where many of the other steamboats stopped on the lake earlier in Lake Minnetonka's history. And here are a couple other images. This is the one on the left is the streetcar boat White Bear at, I think this is at Zumbra Heights, and I believe that's Eagle Island in the background. On the right is the streetcar boat Harriet. And I like to use both of these pictures because when the docks were not long enough, they would go to the docks, not all of them were long enough. They would also stop at private docks if they were hailed down with a white handkerchief. So if the dock wasn't long enough and they couldn't get the gangway up to the dock, they would take out part of the window up by the helm or the front of the boat, and the passengers would come in and out of the boat through the window like that, and you can kind of see them peeking out like that in the image on the right. This is Zumbra Heights. This is Calvin Goodrich's summer estate, which was at Zumbra Heights, designed by Minneapolis architect Leroy Buffington, who also happened to do all three of the big Lake Minnetonka hotels as well as Big Island Amusement Park. A little bit about the fleet here. So I mentioned there were 6 original boats. They were all designed by Royal C. Moore, who was a boat builder in Wayzata. But Moore Boatworks, the facility in Wayzata was not large enough to actually construct the boats in. So what happened was the parts were cut at Moore Boatworks in Wayzata, but they sent the pieces to the streetcar shop at 31st and Nicollet in South Minneapolis, which is right across the street from that Kmart, if you're familiar. It's not going to be there for too much longer, I don't think. But they actually built the boats there at 31st and Nicollet and sent the boats out on flatbed rail cars to Excelsior when they were finished nearing completion. Sent to Excelsior under the cover of dark so as to not draw a crowd. And the first boat happened to be the Minnehaha, was launched into the water on May 2nd, 1906, and it was the first one to be fired up and tested. Each of the boats were 70 feet long and nearly 15 feet wide. To be exact, they were 14 feet, 10 inches wide. The canopies, you'll see in many of these pictures, they have canopies up on the top deck. These canopies were not part of the original design of the boats. They were added in about 1911 or 1912, and they were added primarily to protect the passengers up on the top deck from coal soot because they were dressed in their nice work clothes and whatnot, and the boats were fired by coal at that time, so the soot would come down on the passengers, so the canopies really helped with that. In 1915, ridership was high enough that a new vessel was warranted, so they added a 7th vessel to the fleet in 1915. That one was called the Excelsior, and it was a little bit longer. It was, I believe, 73 feet long, and it looked a little bit different from the rest of the streetcar boats, but it, to the naked eye, was basically the same design. But that was added. And ridership actually continued, it continued to grow until 1918. It actually dipped in 1918 and 1919, went below 200,000 those years, primarily due to probably the flu pandemic and also because of World War I. But after, I think it was in 1920, it actually went up again. It exceeded 200,000, and ridership peaked in 1921. But after 1921, it went completely downhill, and the streetcar boats went into decline after that. This was primarily due to roads being improved in this area in the 1920s. Also, cars just became more affordable and accessible to the general public. But really the big nail in the coffin was the roads that were improved. We have Excelsior Boulevard, Superior Boulevard, all of these things came into existence in the early 1920s, which allowed people to drive pretty quickly to downtown Minneapolis. Also, County Road 15 was built around that time. So after 1921, ridership plummeted, and cuts were made into service in 1922. They continued to cut service until 1926, when it was just no longer worth it to operate any streetcar boat lines. So they ended steamboat service on Lake Minnetonka in its entirety in 1926. In 1926, that summer, 3 of the boats were scuttled or purposely sunk in deep water north of Big Island. Those 3 that were scuttled in 1926 were the Minnehaha, the Como, and the White Bear. The 3 other original boats, or not all 3 of the originals, but 3 of them, the Harriet and the Stillwater and the Excelsior, were scrapped in the 1920s. So they were not scuttled, but they were scrapped. But one of them, the Hopkins, which was one of the original ones, was sold to a private entity and used as an excursion boat until it was also scuttled in 1949. So it actually had a decent second life there as a charter boat, basically. So that left, in total, 4 boats at the bottom of Lake Minnetonka, the Hopkins, Como, Minnehaha, and White Bear. Here's kind of a general map of where they're located. These are very general locations. There are a lot of shipwrecks out on Lake Minnetonka in this area. This is kind of what we call the shipwreck graveyard. The Hercules is a tugboat. We also have the George Excelsior sternwheeler out there. Lake-wide, there are actually, I think we're in excess of 90 confirmed shipwrecks across Lake Minnetonka now. So quite a few, but that ranges everything from canoes to, I think they include cars and that, and everything up to big sternwheelers and the streetcar boats. But one of the common questions that people tend to ask us is if they'll ever raise one of the other boats, and the simple answer is no, just because they are protected archaeological sites, and really you're better off just building a new boat rather than raising one and replacing all of the material, which is basically what you have to do. So the Minnehaha was sat on the bottom of Lake Minnetonka between 1926 and 1980. In 1979, a diver from the Wayzata area named Jerry Provost discovered her. He had a couple of his crew members with him. They sent the diver down and landed right on the wreck, and the diver said, "What did you do? Set up a gym for me down here?" And then Jerry went down and investigated for himself. He consulted after that, over the next winter, consulted with Fred Pierce, who at one time owned the Excelsior Amusement Park. And he also owned the Mai Tai restaurant in Excelsior, and went to him and tried to raise funds to raise the boat. And at that time, Fred Pierce wanted it to be raised to be used as some kind of like restaurant seating or attraction. We don't really know for sure. It was an unusual project at the end of the day. But after raising those funds and just organizing and getting the crew together, in August 1980, Jerry Provost and his crew did raise the wreck of the Minnehaha from about 60 feet of water. And that took about 5 days to do that, and it took three cranes and I believe 8 airbags and a crew of I think about 20 people, and they had to suck mud out from underneath the hull. So I wouldn't be brave enough to do it, that's for sure. But they actually had people with vacuums going underneath the wreck in the mud, digging tunnels. In order to get straps underneath it, and then once they had the straps underneath, they lifted with the cranes and the airbags. It took 5 days, but eventually it did come out. However, it sat in dry dock for 10 years after it was raised. Now this was due to complicated circumstances. They actually thought that they had a different wreck. When they were raising it, they thought that they had the Hopkins, not the Minnehaha. The Hopkins was the boat that had been scuttled in 1949. So at that time, that was only, 31 years in the past at that time. So it was not a historic resource at that time. The person who scuttled it was still alive, gave them permission to raise it. Well, when the hull came out of the water, it started to dry out, and the name Minnehaha appeared on 4 sides on the hull. So it was the Minnehaha, which was scuttled in 1926, had been legally abandoned. It was over 50 years underwater, and it was state property. It was a historic resource subject to a number of archaeological laws, etc. So litigation ensued, but eventually it was very confusing and no one knew what to do with it. It was kind of in limbo for a while. But eventually, ownership was transferred to a proper museum called the Minnesota Transportation Museum in 1990, and that was led by a team led by Leo Malash. Maybe you've heard of him before. The restoration ensued after 1990. It went until 1996, and that took at least $500,000 and 85,000 volunteer hours. And that's just documented hours. Everything in kind and everything that went under the radar was not recorded, so it was probably realistically double that amount for everything. But it proved to be all worthwhile, and in 1996, May 25th, 1996, exactly 90 years after her first maiden voyage, Minnehaha underwent her second maiden voyage, and she was rechristened by Louise Lowry, who was Thomas Lowry's granddaughter. And she went up to Wayzata on the maiden voyage, and then actually went into Crystal Bay to the Lafayette Club for a party that evening, and then returned to Excelsior. And that was the maiden voyage. And then after that, it enjoyed many successful summers on the lake with thousands of riders riding her every year. She would average about 10,000 passengers every summer that she was on the lake. So I'll just show you some pictures here of the Minnehaha as she looked in 1980. This is the day after they raised her. This was August 30th, 1980. And you can see that they took off the upper deck before they scuttled her in 1926. So it was basically just the hull with a bunch of debris put into the hull to make it sink. There's Jerry Provost, the guy who directed the salvage operation. And you can see the hull there. The hull actually did float on its own once they got debris out of it. So it was still in good condition, being preserved down in the depths of the lake like that. There they are hauling it out of the water. And there's the crew in front of it after they got it out. Now flash forward 10 years. This is in the 90s now. This is about 1992, I would say, or 1993 maybe. But this is they're replacing the hull of the boat and starting to rebuild the cabin. But a lot of the wood was replaced, as is the case for many wood boat restorations. It's common for wood boat restorations to have all of the wood replaced, but for the Minnehaha, there was actually about 10% of the original wood was reused. Also, many of the metal fixtures and other things were used from the original boats. The steering wheel is an original streetcar boat steering wheel from the Hopkins, not from the Minnehaha. We use the Hopkins steering wheel because that steering wheel was actually ripped out of the Hopkins boat before it was scuttled and used as a coffee table by a family for several decades, and then they donated it back to the Minnehaha restoration effort. We also have the original propeller is from the Como, which was taken off the wreck of the Como and was in better condition than the Minnehaha's propeller, so that's why we use that propeller instead. But we still have both the steering wheel and the original Minnehaha propeller both in our possession, so we still have it as part of the museum. This is an image, 1993, this would have been when they lowered the steam engine and the boiler into the restored hull. Now that boiler was built brand new for the Minnehaha in 1990, the 90s by the Cleaver Brooks Company. But the steam engine it's not original to the streetcar boats, but it is basically the exact same as what would have been in there. It's a triple expansion, double action steam engine, meaning that it has 3 pistons or 3 cylinders, and and it expands 3 times as it goes back. This engine was built in 1944 by the O'Connor Company out in California, and it was basically used as a museum piece until the need for a steam engine for the Minnehaha was put out there. It was well publicized, and it was actually purchased for a good deal and shipped to Minnesota to be put in the restored Minnehaha. And it was exactly what they needed. It was just the right size, had just the right amount of horsepower, looked the same as what would have been in there originally. So that really made the new restored Minnehaha come to life, and many of the people who were involved with the restoration say that's when the whole project became an actual reality. It wasn't just a crazy dream anymore. And here they are fitting out the cabin. They were getting closer to finishing it out. Putting some of the railings on here. And replacing the planking on the hull. A lot of the people that worked on the restoration will tell you that it smelled like pickles and vinegar in the barn when they were restoring it, because they had the Douglas fir, which was used to replace the original cypress, was donated by that pickle place down in the south suburbs. I think it's in Chaska. So it made the whole place smell like vinegar and pickles. And here it is coming out of its restoration barn this would have been 1995. It was pulled out for the first time for a series of lake trials on stability trials. So this was the first time it saw the light of day in its second life. This is on the same day. And then here it is. This is actually from 2014, but it was basically would have been close to the same scene on the first day it went back in the water. But you can see it has a big 28-wheel trailer, 6-foot draft, and she's backed into the water there. And this was kind of a tradition every year that she's put in the water. It's a big deal, moving a 55-ton steamboat and putting her into the lake. And she's just beautiful. And here she is in operation. I'm sure many of you have ridden on her, and as I said earlier, she had about 10,000 passengers every year that she was in operation on average. Sometimes we had more, sometimes we had less, depending on weather and other factors. But it really was it's a special thing for the community, and she really is a central piece to Lake Minnetonka's identity, and she really is an icon for all of our communities. So she kind of is the cement that brings us all together. So I'm going to hand it over to Tom McCarthy here, who's going to be talking more about the Minnehaha in more recent times and her current situation.
First of all, thank you to West Tonka and Lake Minnetonka Shores for hosting us. We're delighted with the turnout. I'd like to see a show of hands. How many people have ridden aboard Minnehaha? Terrific. Thank you. That's just fabulous, and that's what keeps us motivated. So Erin has done a great job of kind of bringing you through her original life and the restoration. Now I'm going to take it from this point forward, kind of the last 20 years of operation and what the future may hold. And as we do, I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Museum of Lake Minnetonka, what that is. But I'm really going to concentrate on a lot of the questions that we're being asked today by everybody around the lake, and I anticipate it's on your mind as well. So we are a nonprofit, membership-based organization. Our members vote on officers and bylaws. We also include some complimentary rides with membership participation. But the interesting thing to me is everybody associated with the museum and the Minnehaha is a volunteer. We have no paid staff. And as you will see, it takes quite an operation to keep this boat in service. The vision, if this was drafted not many years ago, but I think it really would hold true to the original founders who put the boat back into service. And that is, their vision was to create a living future for the boat. And so we as an organization aspire to promote an enduring connection to the lake's great history by preserving and operating the authentic steamboat that is Minnehaha. And we serve to connect people to the lake. Those are residents, those are visitors, families, friends, whomever. We have great stories of people that have actually traveled from Europe to come ride the boat. We also serve to connect people to life as it once was on the lake. And we're a little different museum because we actually invite people into our exhibit. You're not standing behind stanchions with velvet ropes. You're actually participating in a hands-on experience. We invite people of all ages to steer the boat, to be awed by science, technology, engineering, and the machinery that is our steam engine is just mesmerizing to watch. And of course, we certainly engage all of their senses by sounding the whistle whenever we can. Now, you know the membership, the crews, very well by your presence on the boat. You've seen them as engineers. Those are the folks that actually maintain and operate the engine, make sure that all the systems are running smoothly. The pursers are those people that greeted you and took your tickets, but also are responsible for throwing the lines to stop the boat, secure the boat to the dock, and so forth. And then there are the captains. Aaron is a captain, I am a captain, and we oversee the operation of the boat while it's on the water. But really, I think we should be doing a whole presentation about our maintenance team. These are all the people behind the scenes, and I can't begin to give you an accurate summary, but whether it's working on the boiler, whether it is recaning the seats, which John Palmer, who's here, has led that operation, replacing all of the rot that occurs over time on the boat, repainting the boat. The work is monumental. Not just the restoration, but because she continues to operate, we continue to use her. And so it's just like maintaining an old house. The job never ends. But behind the scenes, it takes even more people involved in recruiting crew members, training them. We have roughly 100 crew members that need to be scheduled. And of course, schedules change throughout the summer months. And so that's a massive undertaking. We certainly undergo safety inspections and licensing and permits, all of the things that we just assume happen with all of the passenger vessels on the lake. And of course, then there is the online ticketing system, memberships, everything connected with the nonprofit side of the museum. Now, besides the boat and its trailer, it takes 4 other critical pieces to make this thing work. What we call the barn, lovingly, is a structure that was originally intended to be a temporary structure to house the restoration of the boat. Well, that restoration took 6 years, and we're now into 30 years being there, in large part because when the team finished the restoration, they had no idea that it would evolve into this. They really didn't know, would this boat work? They just had a vision, they kept working, possibilities continued to blossom, and so that barn has become our home. It is a insulated and heated structure, but it is a very basic utility shed located in Excelsior. We obviously need a ramp, a way to launch and haul the boat out of the water. We'll talk a little bit about the mechanics of that in a bit. We have to be able to get the boat from the barn to the ramp and back. We actually use the Lake Minnetonka Regional Trail, the abandoned railway bed, to transport the boat safely. We don't go down public streets. And then we need a dock to berth the boat during the summer months. So, judging by all the hands and the operations that took place from 1996, we actually have a remarkable story of success. 24 seasons of operation. That's longer than the boat originally served. We're quite proud of that. We operate more than 200 cruises in a typical season. We concentrate on the weekends, some special events, Wednesday night cruises in the month of July to Wayzata for concerts, charters, the boat's been available. And as Aaron mentioned, we average about 10,000 passengers a year. But behind the scenes, there's been a little bit of trouble brewing. We have never really been in a position of control over our own destiny. I mentioned the barn was built as a temporary structure. We were originally licensed to have that barn just during the restoration. We own the barn. We do not own the property it sits on. We lease that from Hennepin County in 5-year increments. We do not own the ramp. We have not had a contract to use the ramp. Instead, we have always relied on our benefactors to help make this system work year to year, and it's been cobbled together very efficiently. But ultimately in 2019, we were notified that we would no longer be able to use that ramp to launch the boat. We were allowed to haul it out one last time. But as a result, we have had to suspend operations for 2020, not because of the pandemic, which is what everybody generally assumes, but because we could not get the boat in the water. And unfortunately, that is extended to 2021 and now 2022. So that's an overly short summary of kind of the 24 years of operation. Now I want to talk a little bit about the future. And I'm going to walk you through each of these so you don't have to read them. But I've got about 10 basic questions that I think I'm kind of anticipating around your minds. So the first is, will Minnehaha sail again? We believe absolutely. She is ready. The maintenance team continues to work each week through this pandemic. In fact, she will be in the best shape when she returns to the water than when she was originally restored. This opportunity has given us a chance to do some extended maintenance, which has been long overdue. But Minnehaha belongs to the community, and the board of our nonprofit organization firmly believes that her home is Lake Minnetonka, and that she doesn't belong to the museum, she belongs to the community. So how was the boat launched before? This is a aerial picture down in Excelsior, Shorewood, because we kind of straddle the lines. And you can see on the far right-hand side, our barn is called out. It still stands today. And then the yellow dashed line is the Lake Minnetonka Trail that we pulled the boat down using a World War II tank wrecker, thanks to one of our close associates and members, Jeff Jensen, who you see pictured on the right. And we go down to where the dredging company operates in Shorewood. For those of you familiar, that's on Gideon's Bay. And that stretch allows us to stay off of city streets, conduct the operation slowly, safely, methodically. Now, launching Minnehaha or hauling her out is no small undertaking. We need to get the trailer under the boat, and that sounds kind of basic for people today. But it takes a lot to get a trailer under the boat. And in fact, most trailers would be butted right up against the towing vehicle. We actually push ours out 55 feet beyond the tow vehicle is where the bow starts. And then you've got another 70 feet for the length of the boat. So we need basically a half a football field of space to operate to get the boat into the water. Well, what parameters do we have for a new site? First and foremost, the boat simply cannot be launched unless we know we can get her out of the water. We are committed to her protection for the future, and as we'll talk about, there are reasons why we can't leave her in the water. Ideally, we would like to find a partnership, what we have been working on, with either a municipality or some tax-exempt organization. We use the launch site 2 days a year. Under any circumstances, it wouldn't be a sound fiscal proposition for a nonprofit to buy property to use 2 days a year. What are you going to do with it for the other 363? Creates a whole nother issue. Added on top of that is, where it is, Lake Minnetonka Lakeshore isn't exactly cheap. So we need to find a partnership. And we need a site that is capable of accommodating the boat's unique design. Typically today, most public ramps, as approved through the Minnesota DNR, are only 35, mostly 35, but upwards of 50 feet long. Well, our boat's 70 feet long. That's not going to work, and we have to put it 50 feet in the water just to get it started. So we actually need a ramp that's 135 to 150 feet long. That's driven by the amount of water beneath the surface that the keel extends, which is 5.5 feet. But it's actually a 7-foot difference because we have to factor in the height of the trailer as well. So what options are we considering? Well, everything is on the table. We are exhaustively searching and considering another ramp, whether that be building a new ramp, modifying an existing ramp, building what's called a marine railway. Frankly, this would be an ideal solution because it's safer. We can control the path of the boat. On a ramp, you have to align, it's like threading a needle. Because of the distance and the minimal width of the boat, we don't want to run the boat off the ramp while that is still being supported on the trailer. Of course, a dry dock would be a very practical solution, except for its cost. This is a picture of the Fraser shipyard up in Duluth. We could look at a crane, we could look at a hoist. There are a number of different ways to get the boat in the water. And we've been searching all of them. So where is the search focused? Well, on this map of the lake, basically we've been looking at almost all of the upper and lower lake. I say basically because there are certain bridges we cannot get under, and we need to be assured of being able to, whatever the water level, pass underneath. And so certain bays have been eliminated from. Erin mentioned that the boat went to the Lafayette Club celebration when she was originally rechristened and launched. Depending upon the water level, we can make that trip, but there are times we cannot. So that's why you see Crystal Bay and Grays Bay as kind of dashed areas. All of the black triangles that you see are different sites that have been investigated. They're actually probably a number that should be added to this slide. So didn't the boats originally get stored outside in the winter? And the answer is yes. Here we see the White Bear on a marine rail system, just like what would be nice to have once again. This system was actually probably right underneath Maynard's in Excelsior Bay. Back then, the boat's engine, boiler, and mechanical systems were a lot simpler. Now, while Erin talked about the similarity of the current triple expansion engine to what was used before, when the restoration was done, certain allowances were made for improved safety, navigation, and environmental operation. Standards changed over time in 100 years. The boats used to discharge heated steam water directly into the lake. We don't do that anymore. We don't discharge waste of any kind into the lake. What all of those types of things have done is create a more complex system. So it used to be likely the maintenance teams that handled a fleet of boats, they probably only had a couple of valves to drain the boat prior to the winter. We now have over 100 valves. And I don't know how many feet of piping. It is impractical to leave the boat outside in cold weather. Additionally, I talked about some of the maintenance work that has to be done. Our volunteers aren't too enthusiastic about trying to paint the hull of a boat in the middle of winter outside. Modern paint and coating products have to be applied in certain temperatures. It was possible back in the day because the Twin City Rapid Transit Company had the manpower and resources to devote a whole team each spring to quickly get the boats ready for the season. For us to do that, once the temperatures have warmed up reliably, would mean we might not get in the water until late June. So why not use one of the other ramps on the lake? Simply put, small ramps and big boats don't work. This, of course, is the C-note at Spring Park. I'm not going to belabor this. This was the first site we considered and was the quickest site to be rejected as being a viable site for us. The ramp is way too short. There is not enough space beyond the ramp to maneuver the boat. The incline, I could, Spring Park is not an option. So you will not see a second boat at but it's important to point out that compared to Minnehaha, the C-note is small. All right, this is a 58-foot boat weighing 45 tons. Minnehaha is 70 feet, 55 tons. Why wasn't this problem solved long ago? Well, the first thing I'm going to say is this board is not focused at all on looking back. We're focused on moving forward. But there were various efforts during the years, those 24 years of operation, to try to find a permanent home. It's a very complex logistical problem to solve. And there simply aren't any easy answers. I think the other thing that's fair to say is that our pleas for assistance were always offset with the response, well, you seem to always cobble it together. There really isn't a problem here. Let's wait until there's a problem to solve. And unfortunately, that's where we're at. So what's the current status of the search? We have delved into great depth on more than a dozen sites, looking at, can they meet our operational requirements? What would the impact be on the residents in the neighborhood and on the environment when we think about having to do dredging to accommodate the draft of the boat? We will, of course, have to go through a permitting process that, just for the ramp, will involve the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District, the Lake Minnetonka Conservation District, the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, plus whatever city the ramp would be located in, because they'll have jurisdiction from the shoreline inward. And time frame and costs are also small considerations. It's safe to say that there is no site that is free of challenges. There's no easy answer here. We have narrowed our search now onto 2 sites. I'm not going to go into depth on what those sites are. I obviously, with only 2 options, don't want to lose one of them at this point. But we are working, and our hope is to finalize a vision and a plan for moving forward by late spring, early summer, midsummer, somewhere in that time frame. So relatively quickly, this is a priority for us to figure out. And so, for 54 years, Minnehaha sat on the bottom of the lake. With support like yours, we know she will not go back. I mean, it was never a question whether she'd go back to the bottom of the lake, but we need to put her back in service. And we need everybody to rally behind the boat. It's not going to be the Museum of Lake Minnetonka and her volunteers or members that get her back. It's going to be the entire community. We will need help with fundraising, lobbying to make our elected officials come to support the permits that need to be approved, and so forth. So I would welcome and encourage any or all of you to not only share this story with your friends, families, neighbors, whatever. There is some misinformation about our situation that's been out in the public. But I would also encourage you to consider joining the museum. We have some cards where Liz has available, along with some applications. The cards are kind of business-like cards that have what are called QR codes on the back, so that you can take a picture with your phone and it'll immediately take you to our website and the appropriate page, and you can sign up, process whatever you'd like to do. We, of course, are going to need donations. While the boat's not operating, our organization has lost 90% of its revenue. I mean, that's what our ticket revenue was. We are still incurring expenses to heat the barn, for insurance, work on maintaining the boat. And it will eventually require an investment in developing plans for permit approvals and so on and so forth. We would welcome any support that, liking on our social pages, lobbying, reaching out to your city council representatives or whomever to let them know how important the vote is to the community, and your position on it would be welcome. And frankly, all of those things would be helpful. So you can do those at www.steamboatminnehaha.org. And with that, Aaron and I will be available for questions. Thank you again for your past support and for turning out today. This is fabulous.